The United States may be preparing to offer Iran something that decades of sanctions, military threats, and diplomatic pressure never could: a pathway back into the global economy. According to multiple reports, a proposed U.S. Iran peace agreement could eventually unlock access to a massive $300 billion investment fund designed to support economic development inside Iran. President Donald Trump insists that American taxpayers will not fund the program. Vice President JD Vance says Gulf Arab states could provide the money instead. But regardless of who pays the bill, the message is clear. For the first time in years, Washington appears willing to put economic incentives, not just military pressure, at the center of its Iran strategy. And that raises a much bigger question. Is this a breakthrough that could stabilize the Middle East? Or is it a gamble that could reshape the regional balance of power in ways nobody can predict? To understand why this matters, we need some context. For nearly 5 decades, relations between the United States and Iran have revolved around confrontation. Since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, both countries have cycled through sanctions, proxy conflicts, diplomatic crises, and periodic military standoffs. Recent tensions pushed the region dangerously close to a broader war, with missile strikes, military operations, and threats to critical shipping routes raising fears of a regional escalation. One location became particularly important during that crisis: the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply moves through this narrow waterway. Any disruption there immediately affects global energy markets. When tensions rose, oil prices jumped. When the ceasefire took hold, prices began to fall again. Now, Washington and Tehran appear ready to sign a framework agreement that would extend the ceasefire, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and begin a 60-day negotiation process focused largely on Iran's nuclear program. Reports from Reuters and Bloomberg indicate that a $300 billion investment mechanism could form part of the broader package, although many details remain unclear. And that brings us to the first major revelation. This deal is not really about the money. It is about changing Iran's incentives. For decades, American strategy toward Iran relied heavily on punishment. The logic was straightforward: apply sanctions, restrict trade, freeze assets, increase economic pressure until Tehran changes its behavior. But that strategy produced mixed results. Iran's economy suffered significantly, yet Tehran continued investing in missile programs, expanding regional influence, and advancing nuclear capabilities. Successive administrations discovered that pressure alone could not force a comprehensive settlement. The proposed investment fund reflects a different theory. Instead of emphasizing what Iran could lose, negotiators are emphasizing what Iran could gain. Access to hundreds of billions of dollars in foreign investment would represent one of the largest economic opportunities Iran has seen in decades. Infrastructure projects, energy development, transportation networks, industrial modernization, and foreign capital could transform large parts of the Iranian economy. The objective is not generosity. The objective is leverage. Supporters believe Iran will have stronger incentives to honor agreements if major economic benefits depend on compliance. Critics argue Tehran could gain access to economic relief while continuing activities that concern Washington and its allies. And that disagreement leads directly to the next revelation. The biggest controversy surrounding this deal has nothing to do with Iran. It has everything to do with American politics. President Trump has repeatedly rejected claims that the United States will give Iran money. Speaking at the G7 summit, he dismissed reports that Washington would directly fund a $300 billion package. He later described such claims as fake news and emphasized that no American taxpayer funds would flow to Tehran. Yet, administration officials have left room for a different interpretation. Vice President JD Vance stated that Iran could potentially gain access to a large reconstruction and investment fund financed by Gulf partners if Tehran fulfills its obligations. Reuters has reported that more than half of the proposed funding may already be committed, while other reports describe the mechanism as a private investment vehicle intended to encourage a final agreement. This distinction matters politically. Many Republicans, as well as some Israeli officials, fear that Iran could receive sanctions, relief, foreign investment, and economic normalization without permanently abandoning its nuclear ambitions. Supporters of the deal respond that economic incentives are precisely what make diplomatic agreements possible. In other words, the debate is not really about who writes the check. The debate is about whether engagement works better than isolation. And that takes us to the most important revelation of all. The nuclear issue remains unresolved. Trump has repeatedly stated that the central objective of the agreement is preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. The administration argues that Tehran has accepted this principle. Iranian officials, however, have offered a more cautious interpretation. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has suggested that many details surrounding the nuclear issue remain subject to future negotiations. The upcoming 60-day period will likely determine whether both sides can transform broad political commitments into verifiable arrangements. That uncertainty matters, because every other part of the agreement depends on it. The ceasefire depends on it. The investment fund depends on it. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz depends on it. And the future relationship between Iran and the West depends on it. If negotiators fail to bridge differences over nuclear inspections, enrichment limits, and verification mechanisms, the entire framework could collapse. If they succeed, however, the Middle East could enter a period of reduced tensions, unlike anything seen in recent years. So what does all of this mean? For the Middle East, the agreement represents a potential shift away from crisis management and toward economic stabilization. Governments across the Gulf increasingly prioritize investment, trade, infrastructure, and long-term development. A reduction in regional tensions would support those goals. For global energy markets, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz could improve stability and reduce risks to one of the world's most important shipping corridors. For the United States, the agreement represents a test of whether economic incentives can achieve objectives that sanctions and military pressure struggled to deliver. And for Iran, the potential rewards are enormous. Access to foreign investment, international markets, and economic modernization could transform the country's long-term economic trajectory. But none of that is guaranteed, because the success of this deal ultimately depends on a single question. Can decades of mistrust be overcome by the promise of future prosperity? Sometimes the most powerful weapon in geopolitics is not a missile, a warship, or a sanction. Sometimes it is the promise of a better future,